Welcome to Art with Ian. Today we're talking about drawing in perspective. I'm going to be covering 1 and 2 point perspective. 3-point perspective is something I'll cover in my fundamentals course, which I'll be publishing hopefully by spring or summer this year. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump into 1 point first and talk about some of the things here. So I made this grid, and you can see, let's just start out by establishing like where is our horizon line, right? So our horizon line is right here. And the grid is basically made by just creating spokes, radial spokes coming off of that. This is the vanishing point right here. So that's basically what you want to do when you create a grid, is establish your vanishing point and create spokes coming off of that vanishing point in a perfect radial pattern, circular. And then in 1 point perspective, you'll notice that all of the parallel line, or all of the horizontal lines are parallel. See this? See, they're all parallel. And all of the verticals are parallel. There's no convergence, and that's why it's only 1 point. There's only 1 point of convergence. That is the key to 1 point perspective, and that is this vanishing point right here. So what that means is that it's much easier to draw things in this perspective, because we know for a fact if it's a horizontal line that it should be going this way, and we know for a fact if it's a vertical line it should be going that way. So we only have to deal with convergence in one direction. So let's go ahead and look at an example here. Now, so this the horizon line is our eye line, as you can see here. I put the eye there, and what that means is that from that eye line, anything above that horizon, you're looking up at it, which means that you can see the body. I've actually drawn these contour lines so you can see through this cylinder. And here you're seeing the bottom, and here you're seeing the top. And then, the top for the rest of these as you go down. And it's really important to understand that, because what it means is that the contour line is, we're seeing, I kind of call it the frowny face contour lines and the smiley face contour lines. When you're looking up at something, you see that frowny face. When you're looking down, you see the smiley face. So if we go ahead and dig into this a little bit, if we take these lines out now so you can't see through, now you can just see how the contour lines, if you were going to draw, let's say a segment, or let's say this was a pillar and you wanted to draw some kind of banding around it in perspective, you would know that from that eye line everything is going to be getting more and more and more exaggerated as it comes down towards the bottom. See, this bend here is a more exaggerated bend than this, which is always working towards a perfectly straight line at the horizon, and then the bend is going to get more and more exaggerated as it goes upward. And now that leads to cone of view, right? So what a human can see, the cone of view, the field of view, basically, the FOV that you choose for your image, is really important for just determining how pushed things are going to get. Like how much warp, how much skewing, warping of the perspective are you going to allow? And that's something like when you consider like basically what camera are you using. And we're not going to get into camera for this because the video is already going to be kind of long, but that's definitely something you could research on your own time, just like or I have another video I can link that does talk about camera a little bit. There will be a description or a link in the description for that. So anyways, so let's say, imagine if we wanted to cut this down. Excuse me. Imagine we wanted to cut this down and have it be shorter. We could take this, and what's happened now is that at the top of this pillar, we see the top. We actually see the top plane of it, because it's no longer tall enough to get to a point where we're looking up at the top of it. So that's kind of, like imagine, let's say you wanted to draw a barrel in perspective. That would be, you'd be able to see down into it. If your horizon line is above it, you'd be taller than it, because the eye line means if we're standing up, with this horizon line being up higher in the canvas, it kind of emulates standing, right? Now if I were to put the horizon line down here, down like here, that would be like sitting, like a human sitting, or maybe even lower than a human sitting, like maybe lying down. And if you put a horizon line, where you put the horizon line determines how much you see up at or how much you see down at. If you want things to feel really big, imposing, put your horizon down low at the bottom, because everything, pretty much everything, is getting looked up at that point. Okay, so let's move on from the pillar. Let's look at some shapes here. So using this basic grid that I've put up here, we can see, if we get in here a bit, we can see how it's quite easy to determine how the shapes need to look in perspective. We've got a vertical, because all of the verticals are perfectly parallel, so there's no convergence, it's just a straight line. All of these are perfectly vertical, and all of these are perfectly horizontal. So the only thing we're worrying about now is from this horizon, from the horizon and the vanishing point, we need to follow convergence, right? And if we follow convergence, then we're going to have that shape is going to go back into space correctly, and then you can cut it wherever you want. So you can tell here that as we get close to that horizon line, we're not seeing very much of the top anymore of an object, right? We're getting close to seeing not any of the top or any of the bottom, and if it were to go up just a bit higher, we'd be looking up underneath it. Additionally, if you wanted to go into the ground, just like coming up from the ground, you have to use vertical lines. Vertical lines will get you height or depth, right? You know, height going up or depth going down into the ground. If I were to take, let's look at this here. If I were to take this out, we still have a shape in perspective. It's still following the grid, it's following the convergence and everything, but it has absolutely no, you don't know if it's got no thickness. So if I were to, instead, if I decided I don't want to go up with or down into the ground with this, I want to go up with this, I would then be able to, I could go, let's create a vertical here, let's create a horizontal, let's create a vertical. Let's go back in convergence to somewhere, you know, where we think the vertical will line up. And then again, a horizontal, horizontal, excuse me. And so on and so forth, right? And that would be, basically that would be in convergence, you know, create a vertical. And that would be how you would do the same thing, only coming up out of the ground instead of going down into the ground like I chose to do. So the concept doesn't actually change. It's just, you just have to determine what direction you're going. But yeah, you know, the grid is still giving you all the information you need to go up or down with your shapes. Now let's look at what happens if we start getting out of perspective with something when the grid has been established, right? So it's amazing actually what this does to your eye. So imagine this right here, this shape. Imagine what would happen if we dragged it, a duplicate of it, over to the right. We would get this. And now that seems like it's been turned really hard out of its own perspective. It doesn't even look like the same shape. I mean, it doesn't even look like it's made the same way anymore. It looks like it's kicked way off. But if we drag it over slowly but surely, it becomes obvious that it is in fact the exact same shape. So basically the point I'm trying to make here with this is that adhering to the perspective and understanding how it's fanning across, and we get a perfect vertical right here, right? That means you're looking straight on at it. So anything that is on the left of this center piece in your crosshair of the vanishing point, anything to the left, we need to see the right side of it. And anything to the right, we need to see the left side of it. And that's really important. So if you're drawing, you don't have the luxury of just taking an object, duplicating it, and moving it around where you want. Now what you could do though, is you could take this object and you could flip it horizontally, and then all of a sudden you're in perfect perspective. So that's that, you know, keep that kind of thing in mind, because especially in digital art where you have the luxury of just duplicating objects and dragging them around wherever you want, once you've drawn something in perspective, that's where it belongs. You need to adhere to that perspective if you're gonna work with it. So let's go ahead and look now at a very kind of vague, like a rough, like geometric human shape. The way that we're able to establish this is exactly the same as the basic geometric shapes. They're just a slightly more refined geometric shapes to make a human shape. But the same exact stuff is going on here, right? You know, you've got this convergence, right, going here. All of the convergences are still being adhered to, coming off the hip, right? So it's the exact same kind of thing. It's just making a human. And I didn't even really go that detailed with the anatomy, just enough to kind of show how it works. And then additionally, see where the eye line is? So what I'm saying here is that this human, basically averagely roughly the same height as the viewer who's looking at this image, their eye line is the same as the eye line of the person who took the picture or who's standing here, in the same space as them, same perspective. And if we wanted to keep on pushing humans back into space, that would continue on a normal even plane, that would continue to stay true. Eye line is where you need to line up the human, right? And so basically now you're pushing this guy back in space, and it still feels correct because that eye line is the anchor. If we were to take this guy who he looks small, but he doesn't look tiny because we understand his relativity to space. But if we were to bring that guy up here and put him next to the front guy, he's that big. And I mean, admittedly, he didn't look large back there, but he sure didn't look that small. And that's the power of perspective. This is a rather pushed perspective, to be fair. I mean, we're seeing a lot of the convergence. Well, we're seeing all of the convergence in this one space. So, but anyways, look how much bigger he looks all of a sudden. That's just weird. Anyways, last thing to talk about in 1 point before we move on to 2 point is ortho views and how to push them into perspective. And the reason we're going to talk about that before we jump into 2 point is that's basically going to be the 2 point lesson we talk about. So if we wanted to duplicate this square perfectly across this, there is a method for doing that. And what we want to do is basically create an X. So basically what we want to do is we want to create an X through here. Excuse me. I need to get a different brush for this. So we want to go from that point to this point, right? And then we want to go from this point to this point. And then that right here in the middle gives us our center line, which we can drag through. And then from there, we want to create lines from this corner through this and into, so that's not far enough. It needs to go through here. And I usually just kind of feel it out until I get it, you know. Oh, it needs to go a little farther, go out a little farther, and then you hit it, and then basically from where this touches the bottom, you create a line. And you can carry on doing that from here through the next one, and that's how you measure across this thing and make perfect squares. So I've got a version of it that I did that's not so on the fly rough looking like that. So basically something like this, right? This is a more refined version of that. And then that method in perspective does the exact same thing. So if we wanted to take, and let's see, we wanted to find this square, and if, believe it or not, this height right here at the beginning of this is the exact same as this. It's 4 inches. But it's converging so quickly that it feels like a totally different width. But this here is exactly the same as this in perspective. So if we wanted to find this square going back into perspective, we would just use the exact same method. So we would do an X, and notice how now the center line for this X going vertically, notice how it is no longer that's really, oh, I see, I'm not on the right layer. Notice how it is no longer in the center. See how we have more here than we have here? That is called foreshortening, and that is basically what makes perspective work. What makes it look like things are going back is foreshortening. So we would make that X, we would create our center line through, everything's going back into that vanishing point like we talked about, and then we would just use the same method. We would go down through where the center line and the vertical meet, and where that touches, we'd create a new vertical. And then if we just kept doing that, we would find this square going back, and it would just get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And it would still be the same square. And that is basically one of the key points to actually getting things to look correct in space. And this is, you know, how much you adhere to this is really determined by how serious you are about what you're drawing looking really, really proper in perspective. If you're just drawing like a landscape, probably doesn't matter. But if you're doing like a car design and you want it to feel really, really spot on, and you want the tires to feel like they're the right distance, and the car is actually, you know, 12 feet long, not like 30 feet long, or not 4 feet long, and then you need to get that first tire, you know, you would do like, you would create like some kind of like an ellipse within here, right? I'd have to actually create it and move it, but you create an ellipse that's tangent to the top, the side, the bottom, and the other side at its major and minor axes. And then that would give you the size of the ellipse, and you'd basically, you know, say, okay, I want this tire to be 4 tire widths back, and then you'd make 4 of these, and then you'd put the other tire, and that's how long that's how long the car is, wheel well to wheel well. Anyways, so that's ortho. That's taking an ortho view, which is the main view, and putting it into perspective. So let's now move on and talk about 2-point perspective. So in 2-point perspective, let's first things first, let's look at where our horizon is, the HL, right? So our horizon line, I'm still on marquee. Our horizon line is right here. So whereas before our horizon line was way up top and we were looking mostly down at everything, now our horizon line is actually below center and we're looking up at quite a lot. And now I want to talk about planes. We could have talked about planes in the last one, but I think that in 2-point perspective it's even more essential to understand what planes you're looking at, because each plane has more voice, has more, there's more visibility of that plane and more need to understand what it's doing in space. So we have let's see here. We have the X XYZ planes, what I've done here is I've actually used an ellipse that sits on the plane and a line pointing into its minor axis. And what happens when you go through the minor axis of an ellipse, you're determining what plane it sits on, right? You can tell that this right here, this line is going from this plane, right? We're on this plane, the X plane. That's the plane that is, you know, right here, basically, X plane. And then additionally, this is the Y plane, you know, and then up here we have Z, which is the ground plane, you know, the Z plane, right? And if you're good at math or whatever, if you've done enough math, you probably know this from that. You know, this is what 3 dimensions is all about right here. So what I've done is I've set up a bit of a visual aid to help us see these planes more properly. So the Z planes are blue. I've got a little blue indicator next to the Z. And then the X plane is yellow. And I've got there's the back plane of X, right? And then the Y plane back is pink. And so now we can see, without the front and the front side planes on, we can see these planes perfectly well, which ones they are and what color represents them. Now we can add the front Y plane, and I've turned the opacity down so we can still see through it and understand what we're looking at inside the object. And then the X plane front. And I think I've got a little reflection there to help. Yeah. So now we've got basically this kind of looks like colored glass shape, right? This rectangle, the cubic rectangle. Now imagine we want to push this back. We've made this shape in our drawing, and we're like, I want, maybe it's a bookshelf or something, and you're like, I really want that in the drawing, but I didn't realize that I don't want it here. I want it, let's say we want it back here somewhere, right? Well, remember a moment ago we talked about how to use the measuring tool to push things back into perspective. That's exactly what we're going to do. So this is what we'll end up with. And the way that we're going to get it there is with that, using that measuring tool. So let me just turn the size down one off real quick so we can see better. Okay, so what we've done here is we've taken, using the perspective grid, what our convergences are doing. Oh, and I should note really quick that the verticals, see how the verticals are still not converging? That's what 2-point is all about. Okay, you've got 2 convergences. You've got a vanishing point going off to the left, and you've got a vanishing point going off to the right. So my right vanishing point, it's these, right? My left vanishing point, it's these. And that's how we're getting this, see this angle right here that goes up to the point and it comes down from the point. That's how we're getting that look. So, oh, went back one too many. So anyway, what we've done here, just like before, is we've created an X through the shape. And where that X meets in the middle is our center line, which just so happened, I created it so that it was on my already established horizon, which is the one straight line across the image, the horizon. And finding where that line intersects, so from up here, finding where that line crosses down through the center and through the vertical, right there, and then all the way down. That's where you get the next vertical, and then you just carry on doing that. Where it intersects, that's where you get the next vertical. And you can just keep going back in space that way. And so eventually, so I was able to determine, okay, so if I want to create this shape back here somewhere, all I have to do is determine where I want it, find my way back to it, and then I can, so this right here, this vertical, right there, is the last actual measurement of this shape. So this space right here is exactly the same as this space right here. And so now I just have to go from where that vertical connects at the top in convergence back to the other side. Well, that's not actually accurate, but basically, yeah. So, and then from that connection, create a vertical, and then follow the convergence back across. Okay, now we've created the back X-plane. That yellow one, we just created that. And then you just continue using perspective, and you build out the entire shape, basically. And what you end up with is this. And something that I want to point out here is that you wouldn't be able to just take the original shape, size it down, and move it back. Because look at the difference between this plane, the difference between the width of this plane and the width of this plane within the actual within the perspective. This, we're seeing way more of the front of the X plane than we are here, because it's actually turning. It's remember that whole finding the center of one point perspective? Well, that's what we're, this the left vanishing point has its own center. And as we get closer to that center, everything is turning this way. And that means we're going to see less and less and less of the face. And as it goes and fans out, we're going to see more and more of that face. So you can't, again, unfortunately, you can't just duplicate an object you've made and move it around in space and have it be accurately in perspective. Now, if you don't care, if you're not that hardcore about it and you don't care that much, then it's not that big of a deal. But if you were, let's say, you had already plotted out a room in perspective, now it's going to force you, because the wall, let's say you're going to put that bookshelf against a wall, the wall is going to be in perspective to the grid you've made, which means that you're going to have to work with that. So anyways, hopefully this has all been helpful and I haven't been too confusing. I know that this perspective stuff can be a bit overwhelming when you haven't really dug into it too much, but I tried to cover the things that I think get avoided a bit in the videos, in the research I've done. I see a lot of just drawing something in perspective and not talking about the why of anything. Like, why do you draw it this way in perspective? Instead of just drawing it, let's talk about why. Because if you have these tools, you can draw anything in perspective. It doesn't matter what you're into, you can draw anything in perspective. So anyways, I hope this has been helpful. I really do. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications of future videos. Give this one a like, comment, that really helps me out when people comment, and I will see you guys in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, share it with your friends, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.